then the things that you're trying to do to like shape or like, I guess with business especially, it's just like, here we are trying to grow this business, but like even if it was a $100 million a year business, I have more opportunity to impact people by loving them directly in my lives. And the other thing kind of is just like, if you really think that making all the money in the world and having all of the trappings of success is going to be what fulfills you, then again, like, it's not like you're in for a rude awakening. You're just always going to be searching.
I'll give you a heads up too, because for the people that I'm just trying to get them to get on the calendar, like I think Leif saw the type form initially, I think he was like, he was busy. And so he's just like, I'll come back to this. Is like, no, just go look at the calendar. And then, which I don't think Leif is still signed up yet, but Mike Dillard, same thing. So like, so moving forward, when we're getting somebody that's like that, I'll let you know, like, hey, I sent this person just to the calendar. So let's, send them other communications to make sure that they're,
and I think if we, once we get to a point
highlight that
where it's making it a lot easier, people are like, oh, I just want your Calendly to book. We should probably just have some VA like Sarah go in and then just learn everything that she needs to about the guest so that she can populate it. It doesn't have to be Sarah, but I'm just saying like that kind of VA work.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, just as an example. Yeah. Okay. No, it's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. Perfect. Well, I
had a couple things I was thinking about over the weekend. One of the things that I was thinking about is how people don't understand their importance or their power that they have in their, like, just in their small little sphere of influence. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times, especially when you're young and you think, hey, I have to get to a place in my life, I have to reach this certain level of importance so that, people will respect me, so that I can like live out my identity. Then, like what they're trying to do is level up over and over and over again, because they think that if they become more powerful, if they become more influential, then that's what's going to give them meaning. And what I was thinking about this weekend was just like, you're depending on like what your circumstances are. I mean, if you're in jail, it's one thing. You can't really have any influence over anybody except for maybe your cellmate. But like, anybody has the potential to really be powerful, impactful, to really exert influence in the world. And especially like, that was what I was going to talk to Ed about perhaps, and we can explore this a little bit. But just the idea of like the things that you do, the small things especially, really matter. And that's where your influence can be felt, because I think about how I interact with my kids and how the small things are what are shaping them and are what are molding them into people that other people want to be around, people who could positively impact the world. And all the things that we do in business, yeah, it makes millions of dollars, but that's not nearly as important as the kind of power that I have in my family and community. So I don't know how we would title.
So like some examples of small things. What are some small things that you're thinking about when you say
at my church, we have these things called missional communities. They're basically small groups. The idea with my church in particular is that like you should live on mission to your larger community, so like your city, and then you should be in community with people who are either in your church or like who are outside of the church and looking to join and become part of the church. And the idea, again, is to be on mission in community. And so we have this one guy who has been struggling because he's on his third divorce and his second with one wife. So they've divorced once, and they got back together, and they're divorcing a second time. And it's a mess, as you could naturally assume. I mean, there's like so many different kids. There's baby daddies. Like, it's just a crazy thing to watch happen. And like, he's just, the other day I've got an infrared sauna, and he's like, I really hate to ask, but things have been tough with work, with finances. He actually is going through some court cases where he maybe be convicted of a felony for doing something really stupid and felonious maybe, but it doesn't really matter. So he's just like in a really hard place, and he's like, I don't even want to ask, but can I use your sauna? It's like, I'm thinking about it. It's like, oh, you're gonna sweat in it. That's kind of gross. But then I was like, but it gets hot, so that'll probably kill the sweat or the bugs. But then I'm just like, this is so stupid. Like I use the sauna like 30 minutes every other night or so, and the rest of the time it just sits there. And so I was like, yeah, go ahead and use it, man. And then he's like done a few other things where like he's quote unquote inconveniencing me, right? Like we're busy. I have 2 kids and I've got a wife, and I try and maintain a sleep schedule, and he's inconveniencing me. Like if I were to look at it objectively, and yet I'm sitting here saying I have the opportunity now to act in a way that shows this person who is really struggling how important they are, how valuable they are. You know, he is a good friend now. Like I met him in June, maybe May, when he started coming to our small group. And so every time that he is doing this, like he's reaching out and he is, you know, asking, like, or he's trying to take in a way. Like I don't really look at it as taking, but again, objectively, like he's taking my time, he's taking my resources, and I get a chance to respond in a loving way, which to me is the kind of thing that we want to be doing. Like that's the power, that's the influence that we would really hope to have in a life well lived, as opposed to, you know, being popular on YouTube or Instagram, or having all the money in the world, or having a nice car and driving it around so that people look at you and think about you in such a way, like people you don't even know having these stupid opinions about you because like you are presenting in a certain way. Now, that's not to say that like having a nice car is a bad thing. It's not to say that having a nice house is a bad thing, but like ultimately It comes down to 2 things in my opinion. Like understanding that like what you are doing intentionally to those around you actually has a much bigger impact on the world as a whole than the things that you're trying to do to like shape or like, you know, I guess with business especially, it's just like, you know, here we are trying to grow this business, but like even if it was a $100 million a year business, I have more opportunity to impact people by loving them directly in my lives. And the other thing kind of is just like, you know, if you really think that making all the money in the world and having all of the trappings of success is going to be what fulfills you, then again, like it's not like you're in for a rude awakening. You're just always going to be searching.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. You know, something that that I think about when you said small things, like you know, doing the small things. You know, and I think about like my family, and yeah, for so many years, like I've placed so much importance on like, you know, being successful, being able to provide, you know, the house that, you know, my family lives in for sure, like, you know, cars, things like that. You know, and I remember I was we moved out onto this property that we were on like, you know, 6 years ago. And initially the house was smaller and we remodeled it. And the goal, you know, has been to build, and with a lot of the company stuff going on, like just haven't felt comfortable like investing into building a new house. And like, it's something that bothers me a lot. But it doesn't bother like my 14-year-old. I don't think it really bothers any of my kids, but like, you know, I was frustrated about one day, and, you know, I think I was even apologetic to like my 14-year-old. I think there was something going on. I was like, hey, I'm sorry. Like, you know, we haven't been able to build a house yet, because, you know, we haven't been able to really host some of the family gatherings that we really would like to have here. And she was like, she was just like that. She's like, I don't really care about that, all that. She's just like, I don't really care about any of that. That doesn't mean anything to me. But what I have noticed with her and my kids in general is what's more meaningful to them is like, do I do the things I say I'm going to do on the other things? So like, you know, there's a go-kart that my daughter and I have been getting fixed on the property. She's like, you know, if I remember to like take the time for her and I to go there and work on that together, or did I come up to, you know, to her room and did I sit down with her and practice guitar for 10 minutes? Like, that's it. Just 10 minutes of like doing something that I said I was going to do. That, you know, and not that they look forward to doing things with me in all situations, but in those, like, that's something that she wants to do. And what's the lasting impact of that? How does that actually affect the way that my kids think and interact, you know, beyond like our environment? So let's say if I don't do those things, and they see me, you know, repeatedly over, you know, time, not honor my word in like little things like that, do they pick up on that same thing, and then they carry that forward, and it kind of creates the situations that it creates for them, or if I'm honoring my word and doing those things, does that have a lasting impact? So, I mean, those are little things that I think earlier in my journey as a father and as a husband. And I think in general, I think people can get overly focused on like the big things, like, I'm doing this, or I'm providing for my family, but it's a lot of those little things that actually are what you're remembered for, not the big house that you did or did not, buy.
Denzel Washington talks about it. He has a quote that says, like, when you die, if you've like, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's like, when you die, there's not a U-Haul behind the hearse carrying all the possessions that you, and it's like, it is one of those things. Because, I called you on Friday at the end of the day, and I was like, dude, you were up at 11 p.m. last night working. No, like, I don't want you to do that, because like that's not what we're here for. Like, this job is important because it puts food on the table,
true.
But it's like, that's pretty much where like the importance ends. And if we end up being really successful with it and we're compensated for that, cool, that's a blessing. But like, to get hyper focused on that, and I know you and I are both the same way. Every morning we were checked, well, maybe not right away, but like, get that Telegram text that shows us the sales from yesterday, and we're like, oh man, like that can almost ruin or make your day. And that's, again, like, not a good thing. And I even saw it this when I got that IRS bill about my CPA messing up, and I got all these taxes that I owe now, plus the penalties and interest. And normally a couple of years ago I would have been like flipping out, and I was a little bit terse with my kids for a minute because I had just gotten it and they're all over me. I'm like, they don't know that this, I hate getting letters from the IRS. But then again, like, I had an opportunity there to just practice kind of those small things. And I can't remember exactly why I was thinking about it, but I was just thinking about like somebody random who may end up listening to this podcast. And I guess that's kind of the thing that we're doing with this podcast, is trying to impart truths that we've learned in growing a successful business. And I was like, if you think that, like, you being a random person listening to this podcast, leveling up to the position where we're at, where we've got companies that are grossing millions upon millions of dollars every month, and you're like, okay, if I can just get there, then I'll be happy. Then my family will respect me. Then I will blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, that's actually the opposite. Because like, if you can't make it up the ladder without like, without taking your eyes off of who you're actually caring for and who you're trying to protect, then you're just going to go up that ladder and end up all by yourself. And it's a very lonely place to be. And instead, like, you can have that impact that you so badly want by making a conscious choice to be kind, to love, to honor, and all of those things. Like, it's just so crazy. And it's so crazy just like throughout the days, like, you can just all of a sudden, like, things go well and you're like, oh man, if I just push harder, then we'll hit this goal and I'll be so much happier. Like, I get sucked up in that all the time.
Yeah, it's so easy. I mean, it's incredibly easy to get sucked up into. I mean, the world that we exist in with entrepreneurs and our peers, I mean, and not to say that they're all like this, because there's a good number of them that, and individuals that we'll for sure have on this podcast that, like, they have the tendency to, but they've led and built a very intentional life where the first things are first, and the first things are their families and their wives, their kids. Like, they take care of their employees. It doesn't mean that they don't get pulled into those modes temporarily, but there's just as many, if not more, that do slide down that slippery slope. And it is a slippery slope, because you can lie to yourself or tell half truths and, it's just temporary. And what a lot of us don't realize is, one day's worth of decisions turns into 2, turns into 7, turns into 20, 30. Next thing you know, you've developed a new habit. Neural pathways are literally created in your brain that now there's a new reward system that you're operating from. And, that turns into years. And then you wake up one day and realize you've lost out on these massive opportunities. And the other funny thing too, and I've watched this more often than not happen, is that it might take longer to build, and that's whether we're talking about success as a business builder or success in any It's on my mind. After 20 plus years of marriage, it's
Never
still
not.
there, right there in the forefront. Nope. Just ask my wife. Where I was going with that was like, whether we're talking about business success or we're talking about like, a vocation or like a hobby or something like that. You can put so much time and energy and focus into those things, but if you neglect the other things, it ends up toppling and collapsing in on itself, and you end up throwing yourself off from being able to achieve the success that you want to have in that specific focus, whether it's business or something else. And then that creates distractions and problems, and next thing you know, like, you're not winning in any of those categories. It's just a recipe for disaster. Or you're on the other side of the spectrum with a good number of guys that I know who have had the success. They've built the companies, they've sold the companies, and they're sitting on 50, 60, 100 plus $1 million, and they're divorced. Their kids don't see them anywhere near as much as they used to. It's a trail of carnage is left, behind them, and I think you can, you create those situations. It's based on decisions that we all make. And again, it's going back to, it's the small things that lead to those big climatic,
and I think that's one of those things too. A lot of people are told, especially entrepreneurs, like, if you're hustling and grinding, like, hey, you've got to sacrifice. And like this whole, the whole trap of the entrepreneur is like, you always have to put something on the line in order to achieve greater and better things. And honestly, like, it should be the other way. Like, you should sacrifice the time needed to grow your business, to be focused on relationships, to be focused on self-improvement, to be focused on your health. All of those things are far more important than what you would get out of making a lot of money. They've done a lot of studies around what is the minimum amount for a person to make to be happy, and then where does it, like, after that, what nominal change is there in their index of happiness, and it's like $80,000. It's probably a little bit more now if you want to take all of the inflation into account, but it's not much more than $80,000. And after that, yeah, you have a little bit more available to you to, cover some bills. You have a little bit more to play with, but like, that's also a trap too, man. Like, dude, so many times I'm just like ordering all this stuff off of Amazon or wherever, and like, I've got so much crap ordered that it comes in, I don't even know what I ordered. And I'm thinking to myself, this is stupid. Like, I've actually gotten to a point where I'm like, I need to stop ordering so much stuff, because I'm tired of having to break down the boxes and put in the recycling bin. Like, go ahead, and you want to talk about time management, man. Like, just putting boxes into a freaking recycling bin is something that is taking up my time, and it would be better if I didn't buy stuff thinking that it's going to make me happier. Now, again, like, that's just like a small example of that, but the sacrifice is, I sacrifice by sleeping 8 hours a night. Most nights I sacrifice by prioritizing fitness. I could be spending that time grinding and working and building the business to a place where it's like, way more valuable than it is right now. And of course, like, what's the motivation behind that in and of itself? Well, if we've got our businesses making $200-300 million a year in gross profit, well, look at me, I'm so cool. I'm a badass entrepreneur and business owner. Like, I'm going to command the respect of the business world, and then all it becomes about me and my identity, which is terrible, because then, like, my identity in my family is going to be like, well, there's the dad that never shows up. There's my husband who doesn't listen to me and has no ability to communicate effectively, who I don't want to be around. There's the son-in-law who treats my daughter like crap. It's like, so those are sacrifices, and those are the sacrifices I'd be willing to make over and over again, over the inverse, where I'm sacrificing to grow something that ultimately, like, let's just be honest, in 100 years, our companies will probably not be remembered. We're not General Electric or whatever. Chance. It's not maybe, who knows? Maybe God will bless us or bless us with a legacy of a company that we built that is then stewarded well by our children, because we love them well and they grow it and continue to make something out of it. But like, that's not the hope. That would just be a nice thing to happen. But again, I don't really need to have this company define me, or these companies, I should say.
Yeah, no, it's taken me a while it's tough to build something, again, whether it's a business or something else. Like whether it's that, or so let's say like, you're really into jujitsu, or you're really into shooting, or whatever it is, it can become challenging to not allow your ego and your identity to become, completely intertwined with that area of focus. I mean, and I'd say it's probably taking me, gosh, man, and not to say that it can't happen in moments, but the level of awareness that I have around that now at 45 compared to what I had like at 35, like I look at the guy that was at 35, and I loved my wife and I loved my kids. But I was so dead set on being a certain way, being thought about a certain way, being respected for certain things. And also, and I was, at 35, I was involved in building a supplement nutritional company that, went from 0 to 100 million in like 12 months, and was working 100 plus hours. Like, one of the main founders that I was building a company with, like, we didn't connect and talk until, 2 a.m. sometimes. I mean, just absolutely like crazy. And like what I was doing to my family during that time, to look back on it, like I was still trying to be present, but like, it's impossible to really be present when like you are giving so much of yourself to something, because it's going to consume all your thoughts. It's going to consume all of your actions. And like, that's where a lot of the small things get focused. And you miss out on the other small things, that are honestly more, I don't know. I mean, I would say they're more meaningful, but there may be people out there that like, maybe they don't have kids yet. Maybe they're not even married. And like, that is like the equivalent of their marriage. And that's great. Like they're in a season of life where they really can fully, attack.
And I think that's where
like
they should
that.
attack it. Like when you're single and that, I want to be married, I want to have a family or whatever, like, go ahead and grind. Cause I think that all of us in the company that are married and have kids, at least like I know for you and I, that was definitely the case. Like I freaking hustled because I knew that if I ended up getting married and having kids, like I needed to be ready to be the kind of husband who could provide and who could actually be there in a capacity. Like I didn't want to have to keep hustling after I got married and had kids. And I made the unfortunate mistake of doing it a little bit, nothing to 100 hours a week. But it's like, go ahead and do that for a time. And even then, like just for a season. And a season to me is like, don't do that more than 6 months. If you do that for longer than 6 months, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to burn out, or you're going to establish that neural pathway that says, this is how I live.
Right. Which is, it's a dangerous slippery slope. I mean, the human body was created to perform in specific ways and for energy to be released out into the world, but also to come back. Like, so when you go out there and you assert so much energy and focus into something, and if it does not return back, like that, there's repercussions to that. Like the human person is only capable of doing that so many times before it just stops being able to function that way. And like, you're a little bit more tired, like you're a half a step slower, like people start getting depressed, like you're not taking care of yourself physically. Like we're just not meant to operate on into perpetuity like that. Like, it's just not the way. I mean, God did not design us to be like that. Like there's a lot of, you want to talk about circadian rhythms. You want to talk about rest. You want to talk about all the things that we now know more, or we constantly know more and more about how energy is regulated, and how just, again, as our bodies operate, it's really hard to sustain that for long periods of time. And there's ways of trying to cheat the universe, and the way the human body operates. Like you can go out there and get prescribed some of the medications that people prescribe, or that doctors prescribe to help with things like that. And again, though, it's like eventually the universe or the world, or however you want to describe it, like gets its pound of flesh. And that's messy when that happens. And you definitely, if that is the situation you're in, like, and you're not married, you don't have kids, like, then that's, I don't know if I'd say that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's not good to be in that spot at any point. But I guess at least you're not dragging other people into it with you to where like there's that type of carnage. But it's an interesting game to play. I think, it's taken me it is taking me, like, it was somewhere between 41 and like 43 is where, like, that's where I kind of really bottomed out from having run like that for so long. And very fortunate that I had the right people that came alongside me at the right time, that God brought people into my life that enabled me to, like, correct a lot of the damage that I did to myself physically, emotionally, spiritually even. Because it's, business is interesting. Like, like, we'll end up interviewing people on here that, are, former, retired Navy SEALs, people from the special ops communities. And I remember I was listening to a podcast years ago. I think it was a Jocko podcast, and he was talking about, if you want to learn about somebody, or maybe not, this is like the, all, end all be all, but like, one of the ways you can learn about somebody really, really quickly is what happened when bullets start flying. Now, I've never been shot at, so I can't speak to that. But what I can, but like, for me, the dots that I immediately connected to when I heard that was, I was like, okay, what's the equivalent of that in the business world? I'm like, well, dollars can create, those types. So the human mind doesn't, and the does not differentiate it between, when it comes to PTSD or trauma, like whether you got shot at or, there was something else that happened, like, trauma's trauma, even like in an entrepreneurial sense. But like, that was for me, I was like, man, all right, what's the equivalent to that? I was like, all right, egos, and dollars. Like, so that's in the existence that I've had in the business world. That's the closest I could get to that way. But that's another spot where basically where I landed with was money and bullets. Monies and bullets accelerate what you're going to see out of somebody's character, like what is actually truly there behind the scenes, that when you throw the right accelerant into the situation, and you will instantly see who they are.
Is that when is that where more money comes in world. Or if the money starts to disappear, like when you think about money specifically? Yeah,
I think both. I think either, man. I think either. I think it's watching a lack of or watching an excess of, and like, you will very quickly see truly what is at the heart of somebody. It's sometimes it's an amazing thing to see, and sometimes it is, you end up facing some hard truths that you would probably prefer not to.
I totally agree.
And I think that's where you see a lot of business partnerships like end badly. Because it's tough to know. It's tough to figure those things out. There are ways to do it. There's indicators. There's things to look for, and that's and I think it's regardless we're looking at business partnerships or marriages or anything like that. There's things to look for as far as attributes and finding evidence of things that support behavior in general. But I don't know exactly how I got there. I know we were talking about just the places you can go when you focus, and how identity can get wrapped up into what you're doing. And that's, I don't think, when I set out to start building companies, it was not with the intention of like wanting to work 100-hour weeks. It was never to like, for me, I guess being on stage, the idea of that was cool. Like, like, oh, it'd be cool to be recognized for something at some point, and be able to like, get respect and be able to teach, and give value. But like, it wasn't the reason. And heck, I wasn't like, oh man, I want to work a lot of hours. My dad actually loves to tell me about a time I came downstairs in our house when I was like 15, and he was in his office working, which is what my dad routinely did so that he could coach our sports teams back then. And he goes, yeah, he's like, you walked up behind me and you kind of like, I don't know if he said scoffed or just kind of made a noise. And I was like, man, Dad, I don't want to ever do what you do. It's like, man, how quickly, the frog can get warmed up in the water, and next thing you know, you're getting boiled alive. It's a crazy existence.
Yeah, I think that's what, I don't even remember how I got into this. I know that my start in entrepreneurship was just like, I wanted to snowboard a lot, and I figured learning how to do copywriting, I could make 6 figures a year and work like 4 hours a day, probably even 4 hours a week. I'm sure Tim Ferriss is influencing me to make it so that my life could just be set up so perfect. And then all of a sudden you're working way too much so that you can achieve this existence where you work far less than you should, or you think that's the case. But I also think, like, just coming back to the original premise of what we had talked about, like being able to have impact, influence, and why people are, more powerful than they might expect just in any circumstance. It has a lot to do with, like, again, money. Now people say the love of money is the root of all evil. It's actually the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So for anybody listening to that, that's actually the Bible that says that. So it's not that money is bad. It's just like attitudes around money. And that's why one of the things when I talk about being able to be powerful or have impact is like the way that you treat money in any stage of entrepreneurship, but especially when things are not working out well or where it's hard, is like if you can take that money and you can just kind of let it pass through your hands in the pursuit of making other people's lives better. So, like for people who go to church, that's generally in the form of tithing. If you don't go to church, if you want to just do something else with it, it can be nonprofits, it can be just giving it to somebody that is in need. But like as soon as you have less of an attachment around money and you realize that it is a tool, or it can be a tool. No, it is a tool. It's a tool that you can use to Yeah,
it's like gas for a car.
So those are the kinds of things where, hey, you can give it away and then you can have an impact. And, again, the Bible says something about this. It says, like, if you can be trusted with little, then you'll be trusted with much. So if you're in your entrepreneurial stages and you're not doing too hot, or you're just grinding and you're doing like the hustle gig where you've got all these different jobs that you're piecing together to make it work, and you treat money like a tool for the betterment of others, then there's a likelihood that you're going to walk into a season or probably a life filled with what would be considered wealth, like at least like in the monetary sense. And that's something that I've always been able to focus on, at least for like the past 13 years, because of a pretty cool story that we may get into at another point. But it's just like, go ahead and make it, but make sure that like for the amount that you're making, there's a proportional amount that's going out the back door and not staying in your bank account, because like as soon as you start to hold on to it, you're going to find that there's never enough. But if you give it away, then you'll discover that there's never enough, because you want to just be able to give away more. And, I think that's a good, like you had mentioned about like finding out about people, and like the equivalent of bullets in the business world is money. Well, if I suppose like giving away money, like in the business world, would be like taking a bullet for a buddy, I suppose. And like, I don't want to make myself look out to be awesome, but like, it was just one of those, it's been freeing, because like I just turned 40 and I've had that stance in my life since I was in my mid 20s. And, here we are with we're coming into a period where the company is just like in exponential growth phase. And if all of a sudden I hadn't prepared myself to treat money that way, then like I'd be in a very dangerous place, because like all of a sudden like dollar signs would be popping up and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so happy when this happens or that happens. And I'm like, no, I'm already happy, because the revenue, the income, the things, the monetary trappings of the world are not what contribute to ultimate purpose, satisfaction, and fulfillment. It's instead like going back to the very basic premise, like exercising power in the small things, being loving, being giving, all that kind of stuff is going to be what allows you to enjoy the reward of hard work. And so, I'm fortunate that I was able to pick that up out of the Bible so many years ago. And because like now, and even going back to the point about like losing money, because you walked alongside me all of quarter 2 and quarter 3 of 23, where we just got freaking blitzed and it was miserable.
Oh yeah, we were getting our ass handed to us. It was rough. No, it was rough. And when now, so that's like now we're talking about stacking like pressure, where like, you can have like, and again, like just to point out, like the way that you steward money, or it seems like such a little thing, but it does translate to such bigger things. So like stewarding something that like from a like how you manage like tithing, or the way you relate to money, whether you hold on to it and you hoard it versus like you allow money to flow through you to the things that money can be used as a tool for, seems like a small thing. but I think the way that it shows up in the world is very, very clear and obvious when you look closely enough. But that's the kind of, I wanted to point that out because I thought that was a brilliant point that you made. But on the stacking side of things, like, man, like, so when I'm thinking about like that role that you fill for us, not only are you wrestling with like, the way that you identify with money and how you interact with it, but then now you got the pressure of everyone else's expectations of what you're doing to generate, income for the company. That's a lot to shoulder. And I got to watch the way that you leaned on your faith and you leaned on things that were more internal, and I would say like, that's what you want to build things from. Like you want to, because you can't depend on money for happiness. Like, can it make you happy in the moment? Can it buy you cool things that do bring enjoyment to you and your family, cool trips, memories, things like that? Yes. But if you're operating from a place of where you are happy, like where you are content, you are fulfilled, like you are directing the money that you're making in the right places, like, and again, it's more of an inside job. I mean, when you hit seasons where, money it's not flowing into the same degree, like it doesn't rip you apart like the way that it could otherwise. Again, small thing that ends up being a much bigger thing when it comes to the way that it shows.
It's a conscious decision too, to decide like how you're going to treat money. And it's what everybody seems to want more of, especially like whenever churches talk about it, people are like, oh great, they're asking for my money again. And I think the number one cause of divorce is over financial issues. And then, like you look at what fuels almost all war in the world, money, in the sense that like money equals power. So it's just an equivalence. So it's like, if you can treat it as if it's a relatively benign thing that has no impact on your meaning and your identity, and it's just a tool, then you really are able to take massive amounts of it and do something with it that most people can't do, which is allow for it to be used in a beneficial way as opposed to sucking your soul from you. And because I think that, again, like the Bible talks about money almost more than any other subject. And it was crazy for when we were going, I think we were down 80% from the middle of quarter two to where we were at the beginning of quarter three in overall revenue. And I remember, it sucked. It was not fun, especially because we were being literally attacked. Like, it was sabotage that had pushed our company down like that. But I also remember having those decisions, and I talked to you about it. I was like, like I was made for this. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I can't remember exactly what I said, other than to say, like, I'm doubling down, not necessarily on work, but just this is what we were made to do. These companies have an importance of being able to contribute positively to society as a whole. Like with Vanish and getting people prepared for the possibility of a mass shooting. So now they have a holster that they wouldn't have used before. Or with Modern Need Survival, having all of these products available for people to use in case of anything, like a freaking EMP taking out the grid, a national disaster that nobody could have predicted. And so it's not like we're here just to make money. Now, this is an interesting thing that I've learned too, is like money is also just it's a figure to denote value. So if we're making more, it's not that we have like the money is our identity. It's just like it's a barometer of the value that we provide. And that really is exactly what finances in business dictate or are representative of. But anyways, I was just like, like this sucks. But, one, I would rather not do it with anybody else. So, that's key, having the right people around you. And two, like, I would rather not be doing almost anything else. Like, if I could be a pro snowboarder, cool. But I don't think there's any 40-year-old pro snowboarders, maybe like two. And my body couldn't handle that. Yeah.
There might be a couple.
This is what.
No, that would be.
Oh my gosh.
That'd be rough at 40.
Yeah.
I mean, even with as advanced as everything's gotten with staying in condition and recovery and all that, just that's a rough sport. Body moving where objects are involved that don't move, like the earth, that you can smash into. there's penalties.
It's kind of funny
for
that
playing.
you mentioned that. Because I was just watching a snowboard video right before this, because that's kind of what I do, like just to pass the time, and I still haven't forgotten it. And these guys are jumping over this 130-foot gap in Utah called Chad's Gap. And back when I lived there, this thing had just been discovered.
Wow.
And they land their tricks, and everybody's just hooting and hollering. And I remember people getting so butthurt about the hooping and hollering that went on in snowboarding, especially skateboarders, because they're like, you guys, like, you always like freak out over every trick. And then I'm thinking to myself, these guys go 60 miles per hour off of a jump. They fly over a gap at the peak apex of the jump. They're 50 feet above the ground. There's a knuckle on the jump that if they impact low on, they will blow themselves up. Like this famous skier named Tanner Hall blew. Yeah, he blew both of his. He shattered his ankles into hundreds of little pieces when I was living out there. So you're just like, yeah, they're hooting and hollering because like the consequences are so freaking high. Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they're putting it all out on the line. No, 100%. And I mean, gosh, man, it's just a great example, of life in general. I mean, there's so many equivalents to blowing out your ankles, kind of going back to the way, talking about the business and what we're built for and all of that. And again, it's like, but it's like having a healthy perspective on the way you look at the business. So it's like, there were, and I'm sure you're okay with me saying this. There were moments where like, I could see you wrestling with the identity that can be created based off of past performance and how you relate to your role and the way that you champion that. But I watched the way that you kind of grapple with that and where you landed. And you made the distinction between, do I serve this company, or is this company here to serve a purpose to which, I've been, blessed with this ability to steward it. And you landed more on the latter. And again, it's like, whether we're talking about money or we're talking about a company, like at the end of the day, it's actually just another tool. So like, we're all very clear on like, with these companies, we want to use it as a vehicle to take, not just ourselves places, but like our communities, the causes that we choose to be a part of, and hopefully have an impact. And it'd be great for it to be something that lasts for 100 years. But even if it's only 5, 10, 20, and we enable some people to protect themselves, protect their families, and then through the success of the company, if we're able to expand that and do something for the kingdom, then hey,
I actually
that's winning.
As you were talking about it being a tool, I'm thinking that another word, maybe even a better word in some sense, is weapon. Right, like so the reason I even say that is when we did that Q2 planning, and we specifically said, hey, we are a Judeo-Christian company that espouses we're a company that espouses Judeo-Christian values as embodied by our founding fathers. It wasn't even like 6 weeks later when all that stuff happened. So some people would say, oh, you put it out there in the universe and it came back. I'm like,
remember, we even talked about this. We talked about it. We're like, by drawing this line in the sand, like, we may attract some form of adversarial
I was just going to say,
response.
like, I don't believe it was the universe. I believe it was an enemy. And this is why I want to say weapon, because like, I think that a lot of people are beginning to understand that there is a real enemy, like an enemy of the human soul, and that is like why this is a weapon, because like this enemy is in control of the woke madness that is alive and well in the United States. This enemy is also alive and well in in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in China, because like those are our enemies. And I believe that this enemy has made it very he's done some pretty powerful things to make it so that they are now advocating for our destruction. And of course, like, that's the nature of empire. So like, if you wanted to look at it totally objectively and with through a secular lens, you could say, oh, well, that's just how empire is. But like, that's also, this enemy predates all human civilization. So I would argue that, he's been in control of empires, like in the warring of empires forever. But, so for us to go through that, I'm like, yeah, this is not just a tool, it's a weapon. And I believe that the reason that we are going to be successful, and not that we aren't already, but like the reason that we are going to grow into something great is because like, yeah, we want to be used as a weapon for light against the evil. And, this is where, if you look through scripture, there's so much language around warring, like warring against the darkness. You know, it talks about that in Romans 12 specifically. It's one of my favorite chapters in the book, but you know, it just talks about like how we should be weapons of light, and like light being God, and more specifically, like in the way that it's talked about in Romans, is like Jesus Christ. Like we're ambassadors of Jesus, and that is like not. It says in that verse, like, do not love evil, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. So that's like where this weapon terminology is coming to my mind, because like you would cling to a weapon in a fight for your life, and as if it was a good thing. And then, you know, weapons like a gun, this little guy right here, just a tool. It's nothing more than a piece of plastic and metal. So it's a tool, but it's also a weapon in the execution of like defense. And so I think that's why we're here. Like it's why we're like, when I showed up, that's what it was. I was like, I'm committed to this. Like I'm just going to keep pressing on, because like we're doing a good thing here. We're making it so that people, you know, my hope is that nobody who ever buys our products ever has to use them. Like that's my, yeah. But the chances are very low that is going to be a possibility. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody has already used a Vanish holster in the commit, or like to defend themselves against an attacker. Like just statistically, it's more than likely, because they are anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million undocumented acts of self-defense using a firearm every single year. And you know, like right now, I think we're close to 80,000 people having purchased the Vanish holster just this year alone. And, you know, our goal that we put out there was in 5 years, we hope to have made 2 million new concealed carriers in the United States. So if it hasn't happened yet, where somebody has used a Vanish holster, it will absolutely happen within that 5-year timeline. And so again, weapon, like I'm happy to use this company as a weapon against darkness. And that's what's so cool about what's happening right now with like Public Square and so many other companies like activating to that call, where they're like, no, like businesses are weapons against evil. Just like, yeah.
Well, and dollars too. I mean, we're watching the way people are now becoming way more intentional and aware of where they are spending their dollars, because they're starting to realize how their dollars are being used to actually, you know, fuel darkness. And I mean, this may sound hokey, but I mean, for one who's really paying attention, like, how else can you explain some of the things that are going on in the world right now? Like, there is a battle going on between good and evil, light and dark, you know, however you want to describe it. When you've got, I mean, gosh, man, just some of the dark, you know, box canyons we could go into and talk about this, but just there's infinite examples out there, and there are infinite examples of the good things that are happening too. And I think those two things move in parallel. I think the more extreme the light is, the more extreme the dark is. I think those are completely mirrored, whether you want to call them entities or experiences. Like, those things seem to move in parallels, and one accelerates the other seems to match it like right away. And that's, you know, I don't know, I feel like that's what we're watching going on right now. It's pretty wild, and it feels good to be trying to equip people to protect themselves. And again, it's like, it's the beautiful thing about, like, and we'll stick with the word weapon. It is something, when it is wielded in the right hands with a level of intentionality and responsibility, everyone benefits. People that are bad actors act more appropriately in those scenarios, because they realize that there is somebody there that is standing there for good, and they will not tolerate or allow something bad to happen, or allow, you know, their families to be harmed, or, you know, someone else in their community. And like, again, like, that's not the goal. Isn't like to man, those situations unfolding are so horrific. But it's why there needs to be people out there who are being vigilant and paying attention, and, you know, training, and, you know, being ready to wield, whether we're talking about money, whether we're talking about any type of weapon, whether it's, you know, money, a company, the gun example, you know, a knife, like whatever it is, like all of those things require a level of intentionality and responsibility. And like, that's what I think, and we're not the only group out there that's trying to do this. There's other groups that have been forging down this path far, you know, way before we are. And and thankfully for it, they've set the tone. Like they've set the precedent and the example for other groups to pick it up and join alongside them. And that's, yeah, I think, it's, excited to be a part of that. And hopefully other groups, when they see what we're doing, like they're inspired, not just to protect themselves and their families, but what else they can do to, champion the cause in whatever way makes sense for them.
Because for so long, what we were doing before you came on was just like, how do we make money? Like that was it. That was the purpose. It was not necessarily like, oh, how do we become filthy rich? It was just like, how do we make this thing work? How is it that we can grow this? Like, and we didn't have, we were pretty aimless, if you will. And then this past year is where we just like hunkered down and said, what is our purpose? And that was, we're going to use commerce or business as a weapon against darkness. Now we have brands that each have their own purpose and that can each accomplish something specific to the brand. But like overall, like the main brand or that like everything's formed over these sub brands is saying, look, like this is a problem. And, like you can choose where your dollars are spent. And granted, like we're not selling clothing for children. So like if you still want to buy clothing for children, you've got to decide, am I going to go to Target or am I going to go somewhere else? And I hope that you don't go to Target. That's one of the like chief examples of like, let's choose where our money goes. Like I used to love Target and I got all my clothes from there, everything from there. And now I think I haven't been in one since February. I was just like, I'm done. Like every time I saw some stupid thing out there, I was like, this is not innocent. Like you guys aren't pushing rainbow everything and all this trans gay stuff on accident. Like you have an agenda. That's your weapon. Like you're literally indoctrinating through apparel. And apparel, like surprisingly, is a really big thing. Like people wear stuff to identify, like to self-identify to others, like who they are and what they're about. So it was no small thing that they're like doing all of this stuff around 100%. Apparel. But anyways, like
well, it was just a matter of time before. I mean, I think whether we're talking about apparel and clothing brands, we're talking about music and media, like all of these things absolutely have been weaponized without a doubt. I mean, and by anyone that's paying attention, I think it's very obvious. Do you ever remember a pharmaceutical company using musicians, like exceptionally famous singers, and athletes to pimp some kind of pharmaceutical drug, or whatever have you? And now it's like, I mean, Did you
see that meme about Travis Kelce?
But no, I saw Aaron Rodgers call him Mr. Pfizer on national
TV. Right after
that.
So funny. While we're making this, he's still dating Taylor Swift and he's sponsoring Pfizer. And it says like, whatever ends up happening to Travis Kelce, he's going to get his heart broken.
Oh man, it's like one of those things that you don't want to see, but it's oh man,
yeah. I mean, that's a whole different rabbit trail.
Yeah, no, I hadn't seen
one that we should certainly explore, because I think half the reason that I'm even where I'm at right now in my life was years ago. Again, watching money. Like as a history major, I saw, history kind of repeats itself. If you look over trends for thousands of years, it tends to repeat itself. And then I realized, if you start following the money, then you can realize like what really is at play here, or like who is controlling the levers. And then you realize, oh my gosh, like the pharmaceutical companies are making so much money. Like they stand to benefit in ways that almost no other industry really can outside of the war machine. I'd say those two are the biggest profiteers out of any special interests that you have out in Washington. And we could probably talk to Jeff about that in the future. But yeah,
I think that'd be a great one to talk to Jeff about it, and bring in other guests that are experts and can speak truth into that, and educate us as much as everybody else. Because I think ultimately what we're trying to do here, again, we're trying to have conversations where people can speak truth and share like what they see and the results that they see that come out of like the things that are taking place. I mean, it's I think one of the coolest things about seeing podcasts become as prolific as they are is, you know, I go back to 2016, like that was the first time in my life where I was just like, wow, like, you know, when that election kicked off, like I was like, man, like it's hard to tell like who's telling the truth on any level. Like, I don't care what side you're talking about, whether it was Republican or it's Democrat, it's like who's actually out there like speaking the truth and trying to like really, you know, be a protector, you know, of freedom, and also, you know, honor the legacy of the people who, you know, who built, you know, this country to be what it is. And that, frankly, I mean, and is the United States perfect? Like, oh my gosh, like far from it. Like, are there things that the United States have done that have not unfolded well, or maybe not even done with the best of intentions? Like, yes, but inside of that though is the ability to do things that are amazing and be a light, you know, be a lighthouse, and, you know, harbor people that are looking for a better life and to build for themselves, their families, their, you know, their communities. It is. But that's one of the things that's been exciting about podcasts. And I think as we were talking about doing this, it's like, hey, like we're exposed to a lot of great people, like with what we do, like we like having conversations, like let's just have more of them. And like, let's do the best that we can to be another channel for people to get information that helps them, you know, live a better life and set themselves up and their families for, you know, just legacies of, you know, health and wealth, and not necessarily wealth, but like not wealth in the money ways, like wealth in the life experiences they have, and leaving a lasting impact that, you know, where they've left the world in a you know, a better place.
I think that's why so many people are kind of upset with what's going on in America, is because we once were a city on a hill, and that's how Ronald Reagan referred to it, and that comes again from the Bible. And what they've seen happen is like the great nation of the United States has been turned into a purveyor of evil and detestable things. And there's just everybody, maybe not everybody, and I would argue a majority of people are upset and they're sickened by it. And they probably feel alone because, one, you can't really talk about it openly. I mean, we get to, and we have obviously formed a company where we're like-minded in our political beliefs. We don't all believe the same thing, but at least we're like, hey, like, it's not even political, it's more ideological, honestly. And so everybody's upset, and they're like, how, like, I feel like I'm in crazy town. And the fact is like, no, you're not. There's a lot more people who are just like you, who believe the same things that you believe about how America has been derailed. And I think that you saw that with Trump being elected in 2016, and of course you saw that with the election in 2020. And now I think it's gotten to the point where there's even more people who are upset with what's happening, and they feel like they don't have a voice. And I think what podcasting really has done is like it's offered confirmation that there are far more people than the average person would be led to believe who feel similarly to how you feel. And that's why Joe Rogan's so freaking popular. I mean, I don't know what his viewership is. I know he's the number one podcast in the world, and then you got Tucker Carlson dropping videos on X, aka Twitter, and getting 180 million views. And it's like, that's not happening because he's just really popular and good looking. It's because he's saying things that everybody believes are true. Right. And, you know, like here.
Well, how wild is it that we're living in a time where the people that are living out in the absolute extremes, like that I would say are more the minority, are being given more voice, to where the masses are responding like they are when they are given a chance to like actually congregate or be able to tap into other people that that, you know, have the beliefs that they have to where, you know, we can see the needles move like that. Like, it just blows me away. Like that, the pulse, like I would say the pulse of our country, like is being ignored.
I think so. This is kind of a thought that I've had. I'm going to just brain dump it here, but they've done studies to show that typically people who are on the left side of the spectrum politically tend to have higher IQ than people on the right. Okay, so this is just something that has happened. And you could argue that the studies in experimentation are biased in nature, but let's just go with it. So, and it doesn't mean that conservative people are stupider. It's just that conservative people have, like, they tend to try and conserve, whereas the left tries to always experiment, and like they introduce instability into the world, and so that's why they end up on the left, because of like how their intelligence quotient is built, and so like that's how they look at the world. And so again, not to say that the left is smarter, because there are plenty of smart people on the right. It's just like the way that they've studied the brains, it's like they just tend to gravitate towards being on the left because of their IQ. And so you're asking, like, how is it that such a small percentage of people can have such a large voice or impact? And what I would argue is, like, because the left knows this about themselves, they know they are smart, or not smarter, but they just know innately that they're smart. What they do, they're intellectuals. And what they've done is then they have made themselves out to be gods. They're like, look at me, like I am the pinnacle of the human race in terms of intellect. And so because they do that, they start to force their own ideologies onto other people. And because they are so smart, like admittedly, they're smart. Like I would argue that most people who are on the left and who have positions of power are way smarter than me. And I'm here on the right, like kind of dumb, but like doing okay for myself. But that's what they're able to do, is like they've created these things like AI. They have created things like the internet, and again, conservative people have helped, but overall tech stands to go to the left. And so they have engineered technology to give and amplify the voice of their chosen ideology, whereas the right is silence. And that's why there is this cancel culture. It's because like it's even more so, like they're able to create so much more cancellation because of the technology they have to deploy, and because they are gaming the system. And this is why so many people on this side of the spectrum feel like their voices aren't heard, because they're not, because they're being silenced. And again, it's because these really smart people have figured out a way to do that. If they weren't smart, let's just be honest, they couldn't have pulled this off. They're very smart.
Oh, no question. Very, extremely. I mean, dude, look at intelligent to the level to where, like, not only have they created massive affluence for themselves, but now there are, I mean, dude, how many people on YouTube now that have these YouTube channels that some of them are just, it's mind-boggling. Like how much money some of these people are making on just creating content. But I mean, so they intelligent level, they created something that literally so many other people are becoming affluent through what they've created. I mean, it's
why Elon is.
Yeah, no question. Yeah,
it's why Elon's an enigma, especially to the left. They're like, wait, you're one of us. You're brilliant. Why aren't you on our side? He's like, because of like, I don't know where he is in his existential outlook, but clearly he's decided to look at things in a way where he's like, okay, like living out of leftist ideology is not exactly healthy for humanity. So maybe I'll look to more conservative ideology, because again, like conservative literally is just about conserving things that have worked for a long time. And the more liberal and, again, leftist approach is like, let's just go ahead and break stuff. Like, that's why they're pushing for transhumanism, and that's why they're trying to do all of this stuff that you would argue is dangerous, because they're just like, we're disruptors.
Which is when our political system works the way that it was supposed to work, where, like, there are counters and balances, like, you arguably are supposed to land in a good place. But now that pendulum swings so far in both directions that you just wonder when the pendulum is going to break off. but that's, that's where like it's gotten nuts, where like that balance is no longer there, to where one side has arguably been able to weaponize all of the things that were there that were supposed to maintain balance and order, are now being wielded in a way that only really allows one side to really be at the party. And that's I think what a lot of people are now starting to see and recognize, and starting to cross into the territory of like, oh, this may not be a conspiracy theory.
Which goes back to that podcast we did a few weeks ago, where I was just telling you, or telling any listener, like, don't put your faith in a politician. They're not going to solve your problems. Like, for you to expect that the election going your way, regardless of what side you're on, is going to be the thing that, or the linchpin to happiness in your life and contentment, that's a false belief. In fact, like, that's a dangerous belief, because then you're looking at politicians to be your savior, and they're never going to be your savior. And you need to look at base level, like, hey, what can I do in my own life to be positive and love others?
Well, and I think it's why we also are seeing, so when you watch some of the very prolific thinkers that are on the more conservative side of things, when they go into the more academic environments, you literally watch people unravel, where they are, you're watching their identities and their egos fracture, because their identity has gotten so attached and wound to this existence that they've had, or this world that they've created, where they are looking at themselves as like the end all be all for this existence they're creating for themselves. And when even the slightest thing comes in and challenges that, like they are no longer capable of intelligent conversation. And that's not the case in every situation. But it's, there's more than enough evidence out there to.
I mean, it's so funny. You watch somebody like Ben Shapiro go to a university, and then, you've got these blue hairs coming up asking him all these questions and accusing him of being a Nazi, or like loving infanticide and all these kinds of things, like just the most ridiculous things. And he just sits there and he's like, all right, you're an idiot, and here's why. And he's got like a 5-point breakdown of why they're stupider than, well, not stupider, but why their belief system is just incompatible with reality. And they can't see it, because what they've done is they've married their ideology, and they refuse to divorce it, because like that has then become their identity. They're like, oh, my ideology completes me. And it's their beliefs about the world that are incompatible with reality that are what are allowing them to persist, because like now we have coddled that kind of thinking. Not we, but like you would argue the Department of Education has created systems where we graduate kids out of high school and push them into college and facilitate this coddling of the American mind, like Jonathan Haidt has written about. And then all of a sudden, like, they get popped in the face with reality, and they can't let go. And so they just continue on believing falsehoods about reality, and then they keep preaching it, and they call everybody else a bigot. And honestly, nobody wants to be a bigot. Nobody wants to be prejudicial. And so, like, again, like, here we are where everybody's like, I'm pretty sure that this is crazy town and I live in a clown world, but I can't say anything because, like, then I look like a bigot.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is, like, I don't think anyone's necessarily telling them that they can't have that existence they want to have. It's just stop forcing it on people that don't believe that thing. Like, they're not saying, you can't have this life that you want to have and lead it this way. Just not to the extent to where, like, you are preventing somebody else from, like, living their life. It's, I don't know. It's very interesting watching all of it. It's
agreed.